Hey guys. So we just got off our Zoom call and hopefully you are all getting ready to be working on some of the initial parts of your reader's notebook. So I'm going to talk you guys through exactly what you are either taping inside or what you will be writing in there to get your reader's notebook prepared for our first unit on short stories. Okay? So I'm going to transition my screen here a little bit for you. During our call today, we already set up that initial page in your notebook, which will be your table of contents. And this will be something that through the course of the year, remember, you should be adding in each section. And this will help you keep it really organized. And as the year goes on and we start to fill this more and more, it will be easier for you to keep track of what is where, okay? So for today, we are going to be looking at the actual short story terms that will be a part of not only our short story unit, but really literature the entire year. For those of you who chose to print these and cut these out, I'm going to show you really quickly what the next couple of pages should look like. So you are going to want to tape in or glue, whatever works best for you, that first page that says short story terms, like you can see up here on my screen. And then when you go to the next couple of pages, you will tape in those second two pages. So what I'm going to go through today are 3 pages of just your short story terms. If you did not or could not print these, that is obviously fine. You will be writing in some of this information then in your reader's notebook, because these are terms that will not only be something that we will be dealing with and you will be assessed on in this unit, but remember, we're going to use these through all of our literature the entire year. So for those of you who are taping, you might want to pause this so you get that first page, short story terms, and then your next 2 pages should look just like what I have here on the screen. Okay? From there, once you have your notebook ready, if you are taping it in, I'm going to transition to the actual notes part. For those of you who are writing all of this, you are going to want to still have all of this information just in your written format. And you can color code and you can put this in marker or pen or pencil, however that works for you, but you still want this written record. So you would want, much like the printed pages, to have something there at the top of that page of short story terms. So you can always go back into this as the year goes on. As I go through this, you will likely notice that a lot of these terms are familiar to you, okay? You have worked with these terms throughout the course of elementary school. So some will be review. I'm going to imagine a handful will be new, and others we will just build upon from elementary school through this year and next year. So the first set of terms you are going to be recording in your notes all meet this first target. I can define characterization, plot, conflict, setting, theme, and point of view, some of the basics of literature. So number 1, you will want to write in the word plot. And if you are recording the entire definition, obviously pause this as much as you need to. But plot is simply a pattern of related events selected by the author to present and resolve some conflict. It is your entire story, the plot. Number 2 should definitely be review. One of the earliest terms you learned in elementary school about a story is the setting, the time, the place, the general environment of a story. Novels you will read will have a much deeper, more specific setting. Your short stories might just give us a couple details about the basic setting. Number 3 is something we will continue to build off of and really analyze on a deeper level this year, and that's the theme of a passage. What is the underlying meaning or message in a story? What's the lesson the author's trying to get across? And a really important thing we are going to work on this year is letter A. Remembering that a theme is written as a complete sentence. And I know that's something you worked on in 6th grade, and we're really going to hammer it down this year. For example, you wouldn't say that the theme of I will always write back is friendship. That's not a complete sentence, okay? The theme is not persistence. Those could be a part of your theme, but the theme needs to be an entire sentence. One might say that the theme of I will always write back is true friendship gets us through some of our darkest times in life. That would be an entire message, a full theme. Number 4, what we will work on this year are all of those conflicts that are a part of our stories. And we're going to break down to the different types of conflicts as well. Number 5, the methods an author uses to create a fictional person is simply characterization. How does an author create a character? What ways do they let us get to know the character? Number 6 has a lot of parts you can see. So when we talk about the relationship between the narrator and the story, or the perspective of the story, all it really means is who's telling the story, which is the point of view. And in elementary school, you talked about the various different points of view. And we're going to look at 5 possible ones this year. Letter A is the most basic. The narrator is a character in your story. And we know it is this point of view because it uses things like I and me and my. This point of view tells the reader what that character sees and hears and thinks and feels. And this is first person point of view. We get the story through that one person involved in it. Letter B is a less common perspective, second person, when the narrator speaks directly to you, the audience. This is things like a cookbook. You should go and get this. You should do this next. Or things like a choose your own adventure story. What step do you want to take next? It is not as common in literature we will read this year, but it is a point of view to be aware of. The last 3 are variations of third person, but there are 3 different types of third person. So all of these have narrators who are not characters in the story. So letter C, which hopefully is a review for you as well, when you have a narrator who's not in your story and you know the thoughts and feelings of only one character, you have a limited perspective of what's going on in the story. It's a third person limited point of view. Letter D, also third person, but it's that fancy word you might be thinking of. And maybe you don't remember how to spell it or remember the word, but you know there was this big fancy point of view word. When your narrator's not a character in your story, and you know the thoughts and feelings of more than one character, of multiple. And that is the omniscient point of view. The root of omniscient, omni, means all-knowing or all-seeing. You know multiple characters' thoughts and feelings. And letter E is also not as common, but still a point of view to be aware of, is third person objective. When you only get the facts and they're reported by a neutral observer. You don't know anyone's thoughts and anyone's feelings, only actions or what people look like. News articles many times are third person objective. So those are your first set of notes for that first page. Remember, pause whenever you need to. I know some of you are writing all of this, so it will take you a little bit longer, and that's completely fine, as long as you get everything in that notebook. The next page For those of you who have taped this in, should be a new page. Those of you writing it, wherever this falls in your notebook, you can just continue from the last part. We're going to look at how you can give examples of characterizations using what we call the Steele method. And a few of you may have learned this in elementary school, but it's probably new to most of you. And the Steele method is the various ways an author teaches the readers about his or her characters. So we learn about characters based upon S, which is their speech. We learn about a character based upon what they say. We learn about characters based upon their thoughts, what they think. We learn about characters based upon their effect on others. How do other people react toward that character or feel about that character? We certainly learn things about characters based upon his or her actions. And we can even learn things about a character based upon his or her looks. And that is the Steele method. When we use the Steele method this year, you will break it down into 4 parts. Who's the character? So what's his or her name? So let's just say you say Caitlin. We'll use our I will always write back example. What is a trait, a character trait we learn about Caitlin? So let's say we give her the trait of generous. We learned that about Caitlin. The next part of Steele is, or the next part of characterization, what part of Steele taught us that she is generous? Well, I'm going to look over here and maybe I say actions. We learned that Caitlin is generous based upon her actions, what she does. And the last part you will do is have a quote from your story that supports it. So you would, in theory, go back to your book, go back to your short story. What's a line from the book that proves Caitlin is generous based upon her actions? And you would include that as part of your characterization analysis. So I'm just going to act as though there's a quote there with the page number. And this is what you're going to work on with your short stories. Who's a character? What's a trait you learned? What part of Steele taught you that? And show us a line that supports it. And that's the Steele method. The next part we are going to be working with through the course of the year is obviously the various parts of plot. Okay? I would imagine most of us can still remember how to label a plot triangle, but we will go through that right now. The beginning of your plot is that exposition. What do we learn at the beginning? That's things about the setting, things about who your characters are, and maybe the basic situation of the story. Books could have a whole chapter of exposition. Short stories, much less, because you need to get into the details in the conflicts sooner. Once you're through the exposition, as we move up this actual plot triangle, we get into the rising action, just like you learned in elementary school. And this is where you've got your various conflicts. Big ones, little ones, meaningful ones, less than meaningful ones. And your whole story builds and builds and builds and builds till you get to the climax of the story. Finally, you start heading down the side. You get to the falling action. which in a short story could be a paragraph, could be a few sentences. And ultimately, we end up with the resolution. Now, what I want to focus on next is what I have starred and in bold down here, because this is one of the trickier parts of literature, and especially for 7th grade students. The climax is the moment that your conflict changes or is resolved, and it happens toward the end of the story. It is not in the middle. It is why your triangle looks like this. The majority of your story is rising action. Just like in a movie, you would not want your conflict resolved with an hour left of the movie. Your book, your short story, will have that climax toward the end. You might only have a paragraph or two after your climax. Sometimes you only have a sentence or two. Because remember, your entire story is building up to this moment. When does the conflict get resolved? That's the moment of your climax. So think of it in Harry Potter terms for my Harry Potter lovers out there. The moment Harry Potter and Voldemort come face to face and one of them defeats the other. That's the climax. That's the moment that we get then to your falling action and resolution. And that happens toward the end, not with 20 chapters left or not with an hour and a half left. And your last page. Those of you who have taped this in can move there. Those of you writing, just continue on in your pages. We are now looking at conflicts in a story and the types we are going to be analyzing this year. The conflict is introduced during the rising action. So after your exposition, it might be in that second or third paragraph. In books, maybe we don't know that for a chapter or two even. We will focus on 2 types of conflicts. We know there are more conflicts than what we're going to write down today. There are conflicts of man versus supernatural, or man versus fate, and man versus technology. Those are absolutely types of conflicts, but not ones we really will be diving into through the course of your 7th grade year. So we are going to look at internal conflicts, and we are going to look at external conflicts, the 2 main types. Internal simply means the character is having a conflict with himself or herself, all within their own mind, within themselves. These are things like fears or phobias. These are things like dilemmas, trying to decide what to do in a given situation. Nerves, anxiety, embarrassment. Those are all internal conflicts. The other types of conflicts are external. And you likely learned in elementary school, you might have 2 characters against each other, whether it is a mental battle or a physical battle, one versus the other. You might have a character versus elements of nature, battling the elements walking to school, the hurricane, the tornado, the rainstorm. And we many times see a character up against a group, up against society. Many dystopian novels are character versus society novels. And those will be the various types. Once you have these filled into these first 3 pages of your notes, you are all set and ready to move into next week. For those of you who are still writing, obviously, I continue to remind you, pause whenever you need to. I will go back up to this first page and just scroll through slowly for anyone who missed things. But you can always go back and add in any of these details into your notebook. The idea is when you need to refer to these terms, it's a quick glance through the first few pages of your notebook instead of having to find this video and re-watch it and listen to me explaining those explanations. Okay? As we start reading your short stories this unit, we will be identifying these various terms and working with them. And you are obviously going to be able to go back into your notes to help yourself identify these. Once you've got those in, you are all set for the day. Have a great day, and I will talk to you guys later.